Patrick Christie's here at Westmonster. I'm joined today by Daniel Kawczynski. Thank you very much.
Good afternoon.
That's all right. And so we're here to talk about Theresa May's big, or not so big, Brexit speech that took place last week. And it did kind of tie Britain into this transitional deal. I mean, what do you think about that, the business that we might be tied to the EU for another couple of years after we've finally left?
Well, I think the Prime Minister and the Cabinet, in fact, will have a lot of work to do in explaining the rationale behind their strategy to the parliamentary party. We are hearing from the media that they are talking about a transitional period of, some say up to 2 years, others say 2 years. We need clarification on that. They're talking about there are real issues which need to be buttoned down, which is the free movement of people. Many of my constituents expect free movement of people to stop in March 2019. Also, many of my constituents expect the ECJ's jurisdiction over the United Kingdom to stop in March 2019. And also many constituents were expecting us to stop paying the £200 million net that we send to the European Union every week when we pull out. So these are major fundamental questions that need to be answered before they can have confidence that many Tory MPs will actually back these measures when they come before the House next year. I want you to know that we are fighting tooth and nail for very, very limited resources. We've had to fight tooth and nail for an extra £3.5 million for Shropshire schools. Very, very tough negotiations. And when people realise, there are still people out there who don't realise, and we tell them that £200 million of their money is being sent every week to the European Union, a body which hasn't had its accounts signed off for, is it 27 years in a row?
That's about right, yeah.
And when there are only 2 net contributors to the budget. I think the United Kingdom has been extremely generous historically. More generous than I would have liked, and quite frankly I think these questions really need to be answered before the Prime Minister and the Cabinet can have confidence that this will get approved by the parliamentary party.
Do you see much of a reason why we need to stay in any way tied to the beyond March 2019?
Well, look, I think that when I first became an MP, I think we were exporting 53% of our exports to the European Union. That figure is down now to 41% and falling. Why? Because the European Union is getting smaller every year as a percentage of global GDP. So why we need to be tied to this, some people want us to remain in the single market and the customs union. Some people are desperate to ensure that we have a trading agreement at any expense. There are people who would sacrifice our sovereignty, sacrifice the supremacy of our courts. Many of those issues, people actually voted for Brexit on those issues specifically, in order to continue to have this sort of trading relationship with the European Union. Let's not forget, as the 5th largest economy in the world, only 15% of our entire gross output as a nation is exported to the European Union. 15%. And in the worst case scenario, if we went to WTO terms, which are terms that we use for trading with the rest of the world, I can't believe that would fall much beyond 12%. From 15% to 12%. So we're really talking about 3% of Britain's output. And yes, it's important to have a good trading relationship, but I put the sovereignty of our parliament and the supremacy of our laws on par with our ability to trade with the European Union. And let's not forget, Patrick, this is the most important thing I think your listeners ought to know. If we went to WTO terms, and I've spoken to you about this before, our companies would have to pay £5 billion a year in duties. Their companies would have to pay our exchequer $13 billion a year. So there's a big gap there, and we could use some of that money to help SMEs through tax credits and other things to export to the European Union, in addition to the £200 million a week that we would be saving by not being members.
And just staying on the business of money for the moment, there was this figure was bandied around that we may well be paying £20 billion over the course of the next 2 years after we've left. And Do we really owe them anything during this transition period? Should we really be paying them anything or filling the gap that we would leave by leaving in their coffers? I mean, is that our responsibility anymore?
Well, I think the reason why many moderate people like me decided to come out for Brexit and recommend that to our constituents is that we felt that Mr. Cameron's renegotiation was a fig leaf and it wasn't worth the paper it was written on. The Prime Minister will need to come back when she's negotiated and explain to us how this benefits the United Kingdom. Because at the end of the day, we need to be able to sell it to our constituents. I didn't feel that I could sell the renegotiation to my constituents. That's why I campaigned for Brexit. Now, many of us will only really be able to sell this to our constituents, look them in the eye and say, actually, you know what, I've assessed this. It's my job to assess it. I'm paid to assess it and then to vote for it or to reject it on your behalf. The government will have to really explain to us that it's in the interests of the United Kingdom to have a transition period. It's in the interests of the United Kingdom to carry on paying £200 million a week net. It's in the interests to have some sort of compromise over the ECJ. But they are very, very high hurdles because, of course, you're really in the European Union still if ECJ has jurisdiction over British courts.
And this business that the transitional period does sound like it's going to involve the free movement of people still, a continuation of that. I think that was necessarily a big factor in the Brexit vote for a lot of people, although not the only one, of course. I mean, where do you stand on that? Is that something you would have liked to have seen, not last for the next 4 years, I suppose? Would you have liked free movement to end at the point when we leave the EU?
Well, I want free movement of people to end immediately when we pull out of the European Union. I am a great believer in the benefits of immigration. I'm an immigrant to this country myself, and I'm very proud of the reputation that Polish migrants have. But we have to control and manage that. There were genuine concerns amongst many people in this country that the immigration was getting completely out of control and that government wasn't able to cater for the sheer scale of people coming to our country, whether it's enough GP services, whether it's enough GP services, whether it's enough issues to do with housing. It has to be managed properly.
Yeah, and so I mean, are you concerned about her comments that kind of reassured the EU that we wouldn't necessarily be stealing any kind of competitive advantage when we leave the bloc? I mean, I think for a lot of Brexit voters, the point was that if we did leave the EU, we had 85% of the world's economy to trade with and take advantage of. And she seems to have been saying that we might not be offering them as most favourable terms as we could. I mean, is that something that concerns you slightly, do you think, or not?
Well, we are still very much in the relatively early stages of the renegotiation. I think what she's done in the Florence speech is to tentatively hit the ball into their court. Now, I think, as many of my colleagues will probably agree, if they dare now reject these proposals and are going to be even more difficult over the free trade agreement, then I think the mood in the parliamentary party will change very, very quickly, and it will oscillate to a feeling where we ought to just leave and abandon this whole process of trying to reach an agreement and go to WTO terms. I still say that they need us much more than we need them. Let's not forget the trade deficit of 70 billion pounds a year, but there's something more than that. If you talk to countries in Central and Eastern Europe, they are extremely concerned by the moves towards a single European army. Right. And they rely upon the United Kingdom as a permanent member of the UN Security Council and as Europe's main military power. They rely on us to ensure that NATO is supreme in keeping the peace in Europe. And even when we pull out of the European Union, the United Kingdom will be the pivotal figure in the common defence of Europe. And we have to maintain and protect and guard that. There are certain countries that will never be in the European Union that are pivotal members of NATO: Turkey, Norway, Iceland, Canada, America, and now the United Kingdom. So if you talk to politicians in Warsaw, Bucharest, Budapest, Vilnius, Riga, Tallinn, the whole of what we call New Europe, which is Central and Eastern Europe, for them, the most important issue is defence. And they understand the huge pivotal role that Britain plays and will continue to play in the defence posture for the whole of the continent. And so we're coming from a very strong position. And this is why I think that we have to press our government to be very, very robust with Barnier. I've actually heard, I don't know whether it's true, but I've actually heard that Barnier is not an Anglophile at all.
Yeah. I can believe that, can't you?
And all his actions to date lead me to believe that he may even be an Anglophobe.
Right.
But if these discussions continue the way they are, then, you know, serious questions between now and Christmas, serious questions will be asked as to whether or not these negotiations are going in a good way, and whether or not we ought to continue to attempt to get that deal.
Now, just lastly, you've obviously got your ears to the ground here in Parliament, and you, along with every other MP, I imagine, has seen Theresa May's Brexit speech that she gave in Florence. And, you know, there was a sense that maybe she was appeasing various different pockets of her cabinet in this speech. And has that shown, do you think, the requisite strength and leadership that we will need to get the best out of an EU deal, in your opinion?
Well, look, I think that she's obviously got a relatively difficult pack of cards that she's playing with. I mean, obviously she's got a small majority. The election didn't go the way that she had planned. So we could have been in a much stronger position if we did better in the general election. But I don't believe that there is a mood in the parliamentary party for a change of leader. I think she's doing a good job in trying to unify the cabinet and in trying to get a collective will forward in terms of the sort of Brexit that the cabinet can acquiesce to. Don't forget, there are very polarizing views in the cabinet as to what Brexit should mean. And I don't consider that to be a bad thing. You know, I think a lot of the media try to portray this as splits, rows and arguments. I called that, I saw that in Evening Standard, disarray or you know, controversial splits in the cabinet. I call that fake news. Right. This is the most monumental decision that we have taken in my lifetime. And if there wasn't proper debate, if there wasn't a robust exchange of views, if there wasn't this clash of views, I would be seriously worried because this whole process requires a fundamental scrutiny and a very robust exchange of views, and each side holding each other to account. I think the only problem that we've got is the Labour Party is in such disarray on this issue that they are not holding the government to account. And I think Mr. Corbyn's even refusal for this to be debated in a Labour Party conference just shows how they are not fulfilling their role in holding the government to account on this fundamentally important historic decision.
Daniel Kawczynski, thank you very much.
Thank you, Patrick.